certifying badasses one podcast at a time. The bus to Badassville is scheduled to come here for you. Pack your stuff.
That's right. This is the podcast for Successful Badassery. Welcome to Wednesday Wisdom. This is Kelly Orchard, the Badass Certifier, certifying badasses one podcast at a time. And today's Wednesday Wisdom is skills and drills for certified badasses. Remember, we're covering the second A in badass, which stands for awareness, throughout the entire month of April. A badass is aware of their emotions. A badass acknowledges their fears and owns them. A badass knows when they need a positive attitude adjustment. So thank you, Bobby. Here's what we're going to be covering on this Wednesday Wisdom. The tools for the second day in badass teach you about positive self-talk to boost your confidence and reframing the negative perspective you have on yourself. We teach you to replace your fears with positive messages and have some self-esteem building exercises. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about some more emotional intelligence and neuroscience. I've got a fun story to tell you about the difference between a reaction and a response and how you can get control over yourself. And then I'll be sharing a little bit about some positive thoughts don't really matter if you don't take action. So stick around. That's all today on Wednesday Wisdom with Kelly Orchard, the Badass Certifier.
Wednesday is Wisdom Wednesdays for Badass Tools. Kelly delivers skills and drills for certified badasses. Badass is an acronym, and each Wednesday, Kelly shares tips, tools, and information about how you can become licensed to be badass too.
Alrighty here. So let's talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and neuroscience in the business realm. Because, it's true that insecure leaders are really easy to spot. They want power, privilege, and recognition. But secure leaders, they want to fire people up, not put their fire out, and display servant leadership, self-awareness, and soul-filled perspective. So today I want to give you a little bit about, I found this article in Psychology Today a while ago, so I'm sharing it today with you, about things that mentally strong people don't do. All right. So I want you to listen carefully. Mentally strong people will, and this, I will put the link to this article in the show notes. So I'm not plagiarizing. I'm quoting this article, talking about it for verbatim. But I wanted to talk about this in the business field. What mentally strong people don't do. They don't lecture people. So they don't tell someone that you shouldn't eat cake while on a diet isn't helpful, and then they already know that, right? So hearing them tell you that isn't really going to spark any kind of change. So no matter what, when you tell people, the person that needs to hear your wisdom, you need to avoid lecturing them about what their choices are. You can't try to change a person. So strong people, emotionally strong people, don't try to change the other person. You try to get them where you need them to be. You don't enable them. And enable, what does enable mean? That means allowing them and helping them to continue with some sort of harmful behavior or attitude. For example, giving money to someone who constantly spends more than they make, or covering up for an alcoholic's poor decisions. It could only make things worse for them. So before you dive in and help somebody, it's a good idea for you to kind of take a minute and kind of check yourself and think about what the consequences are going to be. So mentally strong people, and we're talking about being aware. And I've talked about this before, is that listening is so important. Do you listen respectfully and ask questions? So rather than jumping in and offering advice, a mentally strong person, a self-aware person, is going to listen to the other person talk first. And you can show interest in hearing how they're feeling and how they've managed their struggles. Oftentimes, we are listening with the idea that we're coming up with a response because, yes, we are just trying to be helpful. But you can ask thought-provoking questions instead that might help them think differently. For example, what do you think you're going to do about this? So instead of saying, maybe you should do this, you could say, well, what are your options? Let them flesh out the idea themselves. Be a true aware leader. Other mentally healthy things you can do is set boundaries. I've talked about this over and over again. That's a big part of my program. You've got to have those must-haves and those I will not tolerate that kind of stuff. So set boundaries. So even though it's important to listen to people and having them talk about their struggles, you don't want to participate in their pity party. You may need to establish some healthy boundaries by saying things like, I don't think I'm being a good enough friend to you by listening to you vent for 30 minutes every day about the same problem when you're not doing anything to create change. Some other ways that you can do is, like remember that helping others build their strength might require you to say no to their requests occasionally. Another thing that works is you need to talk about what works for you. This is always so helpful for me. My whole Badass program is something that I created because these are tools that I've used for myself to help me. And I also share them with my clients. So talk about what has worked for you with people that you're working with. That's what an awareness of a leadership will you do. So instead of telling them what they should do, just talk about what's worked for you. Just make sure it doesn't come across as self-righteous, because haven't we all failed at one time or another? Also remember to focus on being a good example. The best thing you can do is to exemplify mental strength in your own life. So when you're asking your team or your staff or your family members to do something good for themselves, well, are you demonstrating that you're doing good things for yourself as well? Make sure you're modeling that inner strength rather than simply acting tough. Great article. Build mental muscle. Everyone has the ability to build more mental muscle. And no matter how strong you are, there's always room for improvement. And that's always badass. And that is an article from just some excerpts. And so I'm just kind of like paraphrasing some of the stuff. That is an article from Psychology Today. Is called How to Help Someone Make More Mental Muscle. Well, that's badass, isn't it? I'll put the link to this article in the show notes if you want to read it fully. But that is, that's emotional intelligence and neuroscience is really what's going to be helpful for you in learning how to practice self-awareness. And, the emotional intelligence means, are you aware of the emotions of the other people around you? I teach that more in depth in my License to Be Badass program in the second day in Badass. Coming up, we're going to talk about the difference between reaction versus a response, specifically to music on today's Wednesday Wisdom.
A fighter trains with the best and wins with a KO. Kelly Orchard's podcast for successful badassery. Hey, badass, you're one of my kind.
That's right. A badass has to be aware of a lot of stuff that's going on around them. That's just part of being badass. It's practicing intuition and listening to your gut and being aware of not only how you're feeling in a certain situation, but perhaps even the ability to read the room. I think I learned how to do this very early on in life. Because, I was a dancer, always performing on stage. So, if you fall down and you notice the audience reaction to that, you pay attention. I used to learn how to be able to make the best out of that. But there were some other things. It's like so. But here I want to share with you a very personal story about the difference between reaction versus response, and specifically to music. You got to get control of yourself. And so basically, everybody has their own reaction or response when they hear music. A reaction is your natural response to the stimuli. For example, for me, when I hear music, I don't just hear it, I feel it. So my body starts to react automatically to the sound of music. But if I was to act upon my immediate reaction, I would always be breaking out in dance as soon as music comes on. That's my natural reaction. When I was a child, I had no ability or desire to control that. I would dance through the aisles at the supermarket. I would dance when they played the hymns at church. And as soon as I heard music, my little body was bumping. If I wasn't dancing, I was also doing cartwheels. My parents have some home movies of me cartwheeling all over the country on RV trips. Later in life, I had to learn to control it. I couldn't always be breaking out in dance. And I can't tell you how many times I was caught in the studio at the radio station dancing while the music was playing while I'm running the board. My family was used to it though, because I was always doing that and we all worked together. I was always dancing. I'd do leaps or turns down the long hallway because it just called to me to take advantage of the space. Music blaring from the station studios. Nobody's looking. Why not? Then I get caught. I learned not to get embarrassed anymore when someone catches me doing what comes naturally to me. But I have had to learn how to control it. The reaction, the difference between the reaction, and that's my automatic reaction, versus a response. Let's talk about that regarding relationships or your business fails or stress, even simple fender benders. What is your initial reaction, that knee-jerk, automatic, physical sensation of anger, frustration? It's a biological reaction, right? The fight or flight, the fear hormones, that anger. And so when you were a child, when you were being raised up, how were you taught to get that immediate reaction under control so that it becomes a response? Because a response is controlled. And that is a learned behavior, to stop and think about the situation before you let your natural reaction occur. Now, I was starting to, when we were allowed to speak out in public, I was starting this whole demonstration about how this happens for me with the song "No Excuses" from Meghan Trainor. When that song first came out, I love to dance, and my grandchildren loved the song too, and so we would dance together. And so I started coming up with a little choreography. My granddaughters were taking some dance lessons, and I came up with some of my own little choreography to create this little dance to "No Excuses" from Meghan Trainor with my granddaughters. And so we were working on it together, and I had been doing the steps in my kitchen, literally kind of reacting to it. And so while this is happening in my personal life, I had gone to a business conference, the National Association of Broadcasters, and I was at a cocktail party, and so they've got music playing in the background, and I'm chatting with somebody that I've never met before, and we're just a cocktail party chatter. That's all. And all of a sudden, this song comes on, and my attention was immediately drawn to the song, away from my conversation. But of course, I've learned how to respond differently. I'm a grown-up now. I don't just let my body just start moving. However, if he could have had a picture of what was going on in my head, it would have been very much like that television program, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, where all of a sudden I'm doing the choreography that I've created for my granddaughters and dancing all over the room. In my head, that's exactly what I was doing. But my body, I had to get that reaction under control and respond differently. So I didn't just break out into dance, and this gentleman that I was speaking to had no idea. But of course, it's meant to be funny and positive, that I want to break out into dance when I hear music. And I don't want to imply that you just have this natural urge to dance that needs to be controlled, but maybe your natural reaction in an issue is to tell when you're stressed or you're tired or you're frustrated, and it's not helping at work or at home. What is your initial first reaction when you get angry, or when you're frustrated, or when you're tired, or when you're having a conflict or a difference of opinion? It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that natural, that automatic reaction. It does not have to be that way. The reason that you react negatively to stressful situations is just based on what you've been conditioned to always do and what's worked for you. So now you wonder, why do I always react that way? Why can't I get control of myself? Why do I always lose my temper or cry or yell or scream or whatever it is that you do with that knee-jerk reaction? That's biological. So in my workshops and in some of these other programs that I work on, you learn that you got to have a tool to help you reduce that automatic reaction. That's how I came up with the Badass soundtrack. You learn how to rewire your brain. That's neuroscience and neuroplasticity. And you learn where the tools are at so that they're readily available for you to use. Now, I don't have time to go over the tools right now in this brief podcast, but I do promise you that it is available in my License to Be Badass program. And I give you some of that in my Badass certification class. So when you get on my email list, or I'll be making announcements on the next time you can sign up for either of those. But just remember that you can get control of those automatic reactions that maybe cause you embarrassment, or maybe they cause additional conflict, or maybe you just don't want that to spend that much energy in those kind of reactive environments. You can be self-aware to how you react now and practice a different response. I hope the story of me kind of making a fool of myself will plant a seed in your mind that the reactions that you have maybe used all of your life, you can shift those. You can learn new ways to respond to things.
A badass is aware of their emotions, acknowledges their fears and owns them, and knows when they need a positive attitude adjustment.
All right, just a couple of little drills for you for this Wednesday wisdom. When you're in the throes of a tragic life crisis, kind of like what we've been all going through, do you find yourself asking, why is this happening? Or what is the reason for all of this? Well, you're not alone. When we plant seeds of personal and professional growth, we look back on all sorts of things. In the book Reflections of Life and the Human Experience, author Steve Maraboli writes, every great tragedy forms a fertile soil in which a great recovery can take root and blossom, but only if you plant the seeds. So if you allow yourself to learn something from a failure or a loss or a crisis, you will blossom and grow in ways that you'd never imagined. I know this because I too have experienced great loss and tragedy. I recall somebody telling me once, just think about all the people you'll be able to help. At the time, it was the least important thought for me. But you know what? When I allowed myself to observe others, develop empathy, and really focus on what I could gain from the experience, I realized that a great recovery had taken root. I blossomed, and I truly was able to help others. So if you're experiencing a crisis, a tragedy, a loss, among everything else, hang on. Plant seeds that will allow you to recover and blossom. But remember that positive seeds and positive thoughts without action won't do anything. Just as they say, love without action is bankrupt, and action without love is hollow. So if we consider that love is positive thoughts, positive emotions, just because you're trying to think positively or have positive thoughts, if you don't act on them, nothing will happen. Now, if you try just to do good things and pay things forward, but you're not doing it as an act of love or what positive thoughts, that too is going to be hollow and probably will make you feel resentful. So here's the deal. Be aware. You need to have both together. You need to have the positive thoughts and the good deeds because they will conspire together to cultivate trust and unity, which will change everything for the better for you. All right, so here's a little drill. We're just going to very briefly, I always have to include a little bit of music on Wednesday Wisdom. And so since we talked about Meghan Trainor's No Excuses, I'm just going to give you 2 real brief lines where she says, here ain't no excuses. No excuses, babe. Your mama raised you better than that. So, all right, no excuses. Get out there and practice some awareness. Today on the podcast for Successful Badassery, we're putting some new tools in your toolbox for awareness. And so we talked a little bit about how positive thoughts without action really won't get you anywhere. You need a little bit of both. I shared with you about the difference between a response and a reaction and how you can get control of yourself. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence, neuroscience, and I've got an article for you from Psychology Today about what mentally strong people do. So if you want to grab that, you can get it in the show notes, along with the Badass Habits ebook. Don't forget about that.
Grab your Badass Habits ebook. Get started on your badass journey. Go to licensed2bebadass.com.
Thanks for listening and getting one step closer to being licensed to be badass. Be sure to subscribe to continue on the bus to Badassville. Snag your Badass Habits ebook at licensed2bebadass.com. You can stay in the slow lane and get just enough tools for successful badassery, one podcast at a time. Or you can join the Badass Ambassador crew in the fast lane by checking your baggage with my Licensed to Be Badass integrated program with videos, worksheets, and group coaching for motivation, mindset, and a fresh approach to living a fruitfully badass life.